Now, on July 1st, 2019, the game changes when it comes to condos, and then it changes again, the insurance implications specifically on January 1st, 2020. In other words, a year and a bit from now. Anand Sharma is in the house to help us understand the implications of all this. He's the president of the Northern Alberta chapter of the Canadian Condominium Institute. Anand, good morning and welcome to Chorus Radio.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Now, I guess obviously there are going to be a lot of implications here, and we'll try to cover as much ground as we can. Generally speaking, this is government action here, new condominium regulations, but I assume that the CCI, the Canadian Condominium Institute, Northern Alberta chapter, played some role in a consultation or otherwise?
Yeah, no, this is huge for condo owners. We've been waiting for this regulatory change for 18 years. And this is going to govern how you live in a condominium and how boards interact with condo boards and what coverages you need. And so it was a big piece of legislation, and we've been involved over the past 4 years working with the governments as they develop the regs. The act was actually passed in 2014, and we had huge problems with it. We spoke out against it. The Conservative government then kind of rammed it through the legislature at the end of December, mid-December, and a lot of problems with it. So this new... Yeah.
Well, let's get into it. I mean, what were some of the most significant ones? I imagine you say there's probably 100 of them, but what were like the top three? What were the worst parts of it?
Well, first of all, I mean, they didn't address this issue of chargebacks. They wanted to really curtail the ability of condo boards to charge back when, say, an owner, and I use the example, backs up their truck on the grass in the summer, and we've got to, repair the damages. They really wanted to see you go to court to essentially recover those charges, and how many condo boards are actually going to go to court for.
Yeah, or how about in the case of a building that we own a unit in, somebody leaving their patio door open in minus 25, bursting pipes and causing $80,000 in damage.
Proving negligence is an issue too. So there was just a lot of issues with that act. It was rammed through. So it was left to this government to come up with the regs, the regulations, which supports the act and clarifies the rules. And so we've been working with them over the last number of years to make sure they get that balance right.
Okay, well, chargebacks were one issue. What have been another couple of shortfalls when it comes to what the existing Condo Act looked like?
So insurance, and we'll talk about that today, but obviously skyrocketing insurance premiums for condo corporations, deductibles going up because of losses, and really condo boards are handcuffed in terms of their ability to address it. So costs were going up, and more
condo fees
therefore go up. So if the board, if the board has to pay more for insurance, that's going to translate in condo fees.
Okay, and what was one other shortcoming of existing legislation?
Really didn't address the condo managers and licensing very well, and we wanted to see a little bit more.
Okay, so some key areas that'll be addressed with this new legislation that, again, comes, it's about 7 months from now, right?
Yeah,
July 1st.
July 1st. Yeah.
Okay, so mandatory requirement to provide budgets, minutes, reserve plans, and other documents at no direct cost to owners along the lines of transparency.
So basically, one of the rule changes, a key one, is minutes have to be provided to every owner in writing. So that means they have to photocopy all the minutes, all the board minutes of the year need to go out to every owner. And that's required now. Before, it was upon request. So, that's maybe not, some people think it's good or bad, but that is going to be a thing that has to happen. So
why? I mean, what's wrong with providing digital copies?
It's not about digital. You have to provide a physical copy.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
What's wrong with digital?
It's about retention. The way they explained it was about retention. And if you put it on a website and it disappears and they don't have access to it.
Okay, so hang on a second, though, and not to interrupt you, but my sense was that you're saying, yeah, this is good. We're good about these new guidelines. And then the first thing I bring up, your face wrinkles, and you make it sound like you think it's a terrible idea.
Listen,
we're off on a weird foot.
Yeah. Let's bring it back a level. I mean, basically, a lot of owners wrote to this government in this process and said, my condo board is being oppressive. We don't get access to documents, yada, yada, yada. So, and they're legitimate concerns for sure, but the government took that at face value and basically brought in some significant regulatory changes which empower the owner to get information. But the flip side is now boards and managers and are going to have to provide these documents and follow these processes, and that's going to cost money and time and energy, and that means condo owners have to pay for it. Essentially, anytime you're asking for more information somebody's going to have to pay for that photocopying. Who's that going to be? That's going to be condo owners through their fees. So there's a balance that always needs to be had, and I think they've listened to the concerns that owners have had, but there might be unintended consequences, and I don't know if they've thought that part through.
Okay, so nothing's going to be perfect, this legislation included. Depending on who you talk to, condo boards either don't have enough power or have way too much power, right? And you'll hear people's personal stories, whether it's saying you can't have a dog or a condo board saying you can't have, this is an adult-only building, which I know has been addressed. There's no such thing anymore, is there, in Alberta?
Well, yeah, it's phasing out unless you're 55 plus.
Right. So, unless you're 55 plus, you cannot have an adult-only building legislation. You can't have that in your bylaws.
Not new ones, no.
Okay.
Ones that currently exist for 15 years.
Condo boards also can impose raises to condo fees based on reserve fund studies or based on the reality of their current scenario.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people feel like that's a heavy-handed move by the condo board. You talk to the condo board members, the condo board's going to say, well, what do you want us to do? We're in the red. What do you want us to do? We're in a tough situation. If all hell breaks loose, we're in trouble.
They have a fiduciary responsibility. I mean, condo boards, it's tough being a board member. They have they're owners like anybody else, but they've got the weight of their shoulders in terms of running this corporation, and they've got to make sure that they're doing their job. And they have to follow the reserve study. They have to make sure the costs are covered. They have some liability when it comes to that, and the new regulatory framework is going to put a lot more pressure in terms of professionalizing the industry, but professionalizing their actions in terms of what they do. So they're going to need help, or they're going to have to spend a lot more time making sure they're following the processes.
You talk about professionalism. You touched on managers and licensing. Licensing is one of the key issues with existing Condo Act points here in the province of Alberta. How is that changing, and what are you optimistic about, if so?
So that's going to come in a later phase. So they haven't actually addressed this in this section, but they are going to do two things. One, they're going to add a tribunal in phase 3, basically, which will allow owners to go, rather than go to court, they can go to a tribunal and hash out their issues. And then the last kind of section they're working on is who's going to provide accreditation and licensing to condominium owners, and they're working on that, or condominium managers, and they're working on that. Right now, the plan is to give it to the Real Estate Council. There's some discussion about whether that's a good idea or not, depending on... That
is a very non-committal answer, Anand. There is some discussion about whether or not that's a good idea. What does that mean?
Well, the benefit of being CCI is we talk to other chapters across the country who've had regulatory models where they're working with the Real Estate Council, and we don't want it to just be a cash cow. It should be an educational-based kind of system.
So what have you heard stories of anecdotally? I mean, have there been people that are managing properties that have no business managing properties? Is that the basic?
Well, we're in Alberta, absolutely. Some of this stuff that has come up is some poor practice by boards and by managers. For example, sanctions. They've addressed sanctions. You need to write a letter when you find somebody. You should be telling them what you're finding them for and what bylaw was infracted, and you should give them an appeal period. That's best practice. So I think government has done that to bring in some of those best practices, and we're missing some of that in the industry. And so we do, like in any industry, we have some bad apples. We have people who are exceptionally great as well. So we have a range of that. So they're trying to address some of the bad apples for sure through the regulations, but the unintended consequence might be added costs.
Sure. What are the implications of the rules around condo boards imposing fines on residents and owners?
Well, they're allowed to do it. Again, what they've outlined in the regulations is a process that you can't just simply say, I'm fining you $500.
It's got to be in the bylaws.
So the regulations actually give you a $250 to $500 range, and a frequency that you're allowed to do it. So you can't just do it over and over and over again. Next day they didn't comply, so it's another $500. You can do that only a certain amount. So they've capped your ability to fine on one specific bylaw infraction. So.
Anand, our guest in studio, Anand Sharma, president of the Northern Alberta chapter of the Canadian Condominium Institute. When we come back, I want to get to the text line as well, because we've got some specific points from condo residents and owners, managers as well. New regulations coming into effect. The new era, they're calling it, in condo legislation in Alberta. 2 dates to keep in mind: July 1st, 2019, and then January 1st, 2020, which is the insurance one, right?
Right.
We'll get to that when we return. The Condo Property Act will look different in Alberta on July 1st, 2019, and then additional changes, additional regulations coming to effect on January 1st, 2020. Our guest in studio, Anand Sharma, president of the Northern Alberta chapter of the Canadian Condominium Institute. There's so much to talk about, so I'm going to give you a heads up now. We're extending this interview past the 11:30 news because we've got some great comments from listeners as well. Some of them with specific complaints. We don't want to get into too many rabbit holes, but at the same time, some general principles. For example, Cher says the president on our condo board has been awarded the contract for snow removal for our building, and he costs more than other contractors. What can we do?
Well, that's a good question. First of all, I'll write to the board and say, quite frankly, did you get other contracts, tenders? Did you tender it out? Sorry. And I mean, it's not that he can't do it. It has to be disclosed. It has to be disclosed in audit.
It sounds shady as heck.
It does. And so really you need to call them out on it and see if they've actually done their due diligence. And if they haven't, honestly, the only remedy essentially is to run for the board of directors and make sure that these kinds of things don't happen. If you feel like this is happening, could you call them to court? No, not really. I would say to her, put it in writing and ask the questions and see how uncomfortable they get. So
you talked about the current Condo Property Act essentially permitting a culture that would resemble the Wild West to a certain degree, and that includes those that are completing reserve fund studies. Now think of the one that we did. It's stamped off with a PNG.
Excellent.
I mean, this is the real deal.
Yep.
Are you telling me that some reserve fund studies, which have huge implications, have been investigated and authored by people that are not essentially permitted to do so?
Well, basically they've expanded on who can do it. Before it was kind of like if you're a qualified individual, but they didn't define who was qualified.
What does qualified even mean?
So you had a range of people doing reserve studies, and you've got people who are PNGs who are looking at the building components and doing those things, and you have people who are doing financial planning, because reserve studies were originally just really a financial planning document, and you get a range of prices and costs. But I mean, reserve studies are becoming so much more than what I think was envisioned. So putting qualifications on who can provide them is really important. I have a building that's looking at a $9 million retrofit that they didn't really detect the issues of water getting in behind the building. The previous reserve study.
How many units?
148 units.
148 units splitting a $9 million tab unexpectedly.
Yeah.
Well, reserve fund studies, one thing they do is tee up special assessments. They call them cash calls. That's where I want to go with you, plus insurance implications.
Sure.
After this break for the news on 770 CHQR and 630 CHED, we're talking to Anand Sharma of the Canadian Condominium Institute.
And now, we'll head to overtime on the Ryan Jespensen Show right here on 630 CHED.
Province-wide conversation on condos this morning with Anand Sharma, president of the CCI, the Canadian Condominium Institute, the Northern Alberta chapter. Changes will be implemented July 1st, 2019, January 1st, 2020. Those are the insurance implications we'll get to. But you were telling me that a couple of things are changing, like as of right now. They've immediately changed, right? Including chargebacks. Let's clarify here.
So, yeah, it's a little bit complicated, but basically the right to charge back was, without having to go to court, was what was in the legislation. We were able to work with Minister Malkinson and his office to not proclaim that section, which essentially means it's status quo around chargebacks. So condo boards can charge back. There was a huge letter writing campaign. There was a huge postcard campaign from boards and individuals living in condos saying we need the right to charge back. There are people doing things all the time, and regular condo owners who are not doing those things shouldn't have to pay for it.
So chargebacks essentially mean we're not going to dip into our reserve fund, or we're not going to utilize our own insurance policy to repair damage caused by an individual who should be personally liable.
Right, to some extent, yeah, absolutely.
So, what extent am I not? I want to try to seek clarity here.
The bigger concern was the $500 chargeback for damaging common property. And I use the example of somebody, backing up their truck on the grass and destroying the grass in the summer. Should the rest of the owners have to pay for that, or should that owner who backed up their truck on the grass have to pay for it? So what would happen now is we could still charge back, but in order to cover the cost, we'd have to go to court to get the $300. But are we going to go to court to get the $300? Very unlikely. So owners were going to end up paying for charges like that under the current regime, under the current act and what they were bringing forward. We were able to convince the Alberta government and this minister specifically to not read in that section of the act, so that it goes back to what was there before 2014, which is that we can.
Let's say it's not something as, and I don't mean to poo-poo people's concerns about their curb appeal and their aesthetic, but I can fix tire tracks on sod, right? I can fill it with some soil and put some grass down. Yeah, it'll annoy people to put the grass seed down, wait for it to come in. What about someone that leaves their bathtub running for 6 days and floods 6 units, destroys people's property, and causes something to the tune of, $50,000 to $100,000 damage?
Happens all the time, and this is the best part of what's come forward and what we've lobbied for, which is that insurance, that we can go after owners for up to $50,000 in terms of the deductible. So the insurance deductible can be charged back to the owner, who should have their own insurance, which covers deductibles being charged back, if that makes sense.
So now a board can, in our circumstance, and I don't want to make this too personal, but I'm living this right now. Let me tell you our story very quickly.
Yeah.
We've had a bad year at our condo building, a really bad year. 2 big insurance claims, so much so, I was telling you not off the air, that our insurance provider essentially said they were going to drop us. Mm-hmm. We were without insurance and we're having a hard time finding someone to insure the building, so we signed on to a deal that is a bad deal for us. Our premiums went up. Condo fees are probably going to go up. They're already way too high, and our deductible just doubled to $50,000. So we're in a tough position here.
Happens all the time right now, and especially if you're in a smaller condo complex with 30, 40, 50 units, when insurance deductibles and premiums take up a bigger and bigger share, 40% of your budget, that's a problem. So this is going to address this. We're able to now charge back individual owners for losses incurred within their unit that affect the common property, which is a lot of legalese. But if you have a bathtub that overflows and affects the unit below and your own walls and those kinds of things, you will have to pay through your insurance.
However, condo bylaws, if I understand correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, cannot require owners nor renters to actually carry insurance,
so
right?
That's one of the issues with the regs that we've noted, and that's one of the things the government has said, we'll come back and fix some of these potential loopholes or issues. But one of the things is it's not mandatory that you get the insurance deductible and insurance in your own policy.
So even if you write it into your condo bylaws, it has no staking power?
The regulations don't require you to have it. So it always goes act, regulations, then bylaws. So
in other words, we can say our bylaws required you to have this insurance. They can say we're going to go one notch up the totem pole and prove that we don't. I don't know why anybody wouldn't carry insurance.
But the message here today is, if you're a condominium owner, make sure your insurance, your personal insurance coverage for your unit has deductible insurance for up to $50,000. Start preparing for that, because you don't want to be caught having to foot a $50,000 bill because you didn't have the right insurance. So everything is changing on that front, and we're going to work to educate people on that over the next year.
Listeners wondering, do fines have to have a specific amount related to a specific infraction written into the bylaws to be enforceable?
So the regulations give a range of what your fines can be, and I believe it's $250 to $500, and they give you a number of incidences that you can have. So say somebody doesn't they get fined for something, you can't. Some boards were doing that they were fining them on a daily basis for 30 days and racking up the bill. You can't do that anymore. They've put I think it's 6 times that you can charge on one particular issue, and the range is between $250 and $500. So that's in the regs, which again supersede the bylaws. So you can't go beyond that framework. Now, if you want to clarify that the first infraction will be $250, the second one will be $350, you should put that in your bylaws. But yeah, the range, the guidelines, the regs have expanded so much. They give you so much more guidance than they did before, that bylaws, have to be in line with those regs, of course.
There's been a certain understanding, I won't say consensus, because that's a dangerous word to use, but I've heard a lot of people imply that developers have been getting away with murder. Most particularly, I think, from the big housing boom mid-last decade for the next number of years. I can think of a couple big special assessments for units that were relatively new. I'm thinking of The View, just south of Jasper Avenue. They had huge problems with their balconies. People that live in that building were telling me what a nightmare it was. Is that being addressed? Is that still an issue right now? now?
It absolutely is still an issue, and I think that is one thing that we'll look back in the 2000s and say, where was government protecting condominium owners? Nowhere. The reality is we have buildings even today that are having issues. There are new regulations in place for 2014-15 requiring like a building assessment report, but ultimately developers have gotten away with murder, so to speak.
In which context?
You have huge building envelope issues. They didn't build the buildings correctly. Nobody was watching them build the buildings, and you've got water infiltration left, right, and center. And the cost implications is hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars being passed on to condominium owners, sometimes new buyers who this is all they've got. This is their big financial investment, and you get hit with a $50,000 assessment. What do you do then? Or what if you're a senior who you've now downgraded to condo, a smaller type of living? You're on a fixed income. Now you have to pay 40 or 50, and it's left to the board of directors and the managers to give the bad news that, the developer didn't do a good job. Nobody caught them. Nobody was looking at the building envelope. Nobody suspected that these issues would occur. And by the way, it's too late to go after them because they're out of there in 2 years. So,
yeah, we've lived it. Yeah. It's obviously a real kick in the teeth to get hit with a special assessment, or colloquially known as a cash call. Yep. Does anything change with these new regulations in the context of special assessments?
Sure. Special assessments, all they're doing again is making it important that the best practice be put forward. So talking about what's in the language when you do assess, being very clear on what the assessment amount is, what it's for, what happens with the funds if there's an excess amount left over, which rarely happens. But if you have a project that's $5 million and it works out to be $4.5 million, what happens with the $0.5 million? Well, it goes back to your reserve. So they've clarified the rules around it and making sure that owners have all that information, because there was varied information. Some boards were doing this, some weren't. Some are like, here, your portion is $12,000. Doesn't explain what it's for. It's by unit factor basis or not. Like there's a lot of things we're missing before. So the government's done a good job on these and a number of other issues, giving the process and making sure that the language is written and the letter is written and the people are made to understand.
We're talking to Anand Sharma, who's the president of the Northern Alberta chapter of the Canadian Condominium Institute. Probably the most common text, I just touched on it very briefly, one or two sentences, but the common text to 630 right now has to do with kids and adult condos. I mean, was there a lot of, did you see, I know you can act as a bit of a sounding board, the CCI can. Did you experience a lot of pushback when the current government amended that to essentially say unless you're a certified 55 plus, there's no way that a condo can say we're adult only anymore? You know what?
And we've had these conversations before. We were at the front lines of this. We got the exemption for 55 plus. The people on the other side didn't even want that. We were able to get a 15-year grandfathering clause, so to speak, so that current condominiums that are adult restricted are allowed to be for 15 years, which kind of quelled some of the concerns, because the people currently living in adult-only buildings had 15 years, and by then they were probably 55. So, it was probably the best public policy you could get, given the trend nationally and internationally that age-restricted buildings are not cool or okay.
Well, I'm going to tell you what, and I'll take the unpopular opinion here then. I totally disagree with it. I absolutely 100% think that you should absolutely be able to say it's an adult-only building. People started putting really ridiculous stuff in front of me. Like really ridiculous. What are you going to say, Ryan? That African Americans can't be in the building? What are you going to say? And certain religions can't? I'm going, give me a break. Wow. That conversation gets to be so ridiculous. But to me, it's a private. You and I we don't need to debate this.
We agree.
I will. No. Oh, we do?
Oh no, I was on the side.
I will always disagree with it. Yeah. I think it's terrible legislation, and I think it screws people that invested in those buildings. I really feel for those people.
No, I believe in choice, and we fought for choice. And we said they should be able to have adult-only restricted buildings, but human rights legislation kind of, but there was a lot of stuff put out there. Like on my personal Facebook, I wrote, congratulations to my niece, happy birthday, and somebody's like, I'm glad you like your niece, but what about other kids in the
Yeah, I mean, people are just going to,
it was ridiculous.
You don't care about that.
But, you kind of deal with it, and you try to have good discourse.
Did we, as mentioned, there are two dates that are significant here. July 1st, 2019, when most of these come into effect, and then January 1st, 2020, which is the insurance stuff. We've talked a bit about the insurance implications. Have we covered it all, or is there something you're going to get in the parking lot and leave here and go, we forgot to talk about that?
Well, there's so many changes. I think we've covered the big stuff for sure. I will say that CCI's role as a nonprofit is to educate, and we're going to be educating the heck out of people over the next year, because it's important that condo boards, managers, and even owners know what their responsibilities are. I mean, there are huge regulatory and administrative burden on condo boards. It's a bigger job now, and it's our job to make sure that they're prepared. So,
okay, thanks for hanging out with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Anand Sharma, president of the Northern Alberta chapter of the Canadian Condominium Institute. Hearing anecdotally about different takes. These are, some of these stories on the text line to 630. If you'd rather talk than text, I'd love to hear about your personal experience when it comes to condos. Give us a shout, 780-496-0063, 1-800-663-0630 as we broadcast across the province of Alberta this morning. You can find me on Twitter at Ryan Jespersen, and our text line wide open to 630. Listener here says, regarding condos, developers need to leave a building guarantee bond deposited with a government body for at least 5 years after the building construction is completed. It's time to get rid of fly-by-night developers. That from a listener that I wonder if they have personal experience. You can let me know. We've seen that with our building. I've heard about it from other buildings. What a kick in the teeth for people that get a mortgage on a property they're excited to move into. They're understandably optimistic about their future there, can't wait to pay down that principal, to have that investment, and then all of a sudden, whammo, you get hit with a special assessment. Sometimes these special assessments are of the annoying variety. I mean, they still hit you in the pocket, but it's more of an annoyance. We've had some that are $1,000, $900, $1,400. It's an annoyance, and you have to adjust and amend, but you're able to somehow work it out. And then there are these ones for $38,000 or $60,000 or $200,000 where people are put in positions. If you have equity in your property, if it's paid off, maybe you refinance it. We hear stories, very real stories of people that, they let it go to foreclosure because they can't manage, they cannot make that special assessment happen. And in many circumstances, it's because they bought in good faith with limited information, and now they're nothing shy of screwed. Let's find out why Norm's dialing in. Norm, what's your story?
Hi, Ryan. So 2 years ago, we had a rental. Well, I still have it, but anyway, the management company had sent out notifications, decided that if you weren't living in the unit and it was being rented, you needed to give your damage deposit over to the management company so that they would be covered should there be any damages. I got the notice. I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. I thought it was dumb, and it wasn't really that intimidating. I just left it alone. And about 4 months later, I get served papers from a lawyer for that $1,000 that is supposed to be held in trust by the management company, plus legal fees, which were $2,200.
Jeez.
And this was so easy to avoid, and I never got another warning or a request or anything. This just came out of the blue. Like, they don't care. If I get a $2,000-$3,000 lawyer bill for something that could have been handled very easily, they don't even care. They're just like, well, that's our business. Too bad. And it's very sorry.
No, go ahead. And Norm, I was just going to say, Norm, one of the things that's interesting about this, out of the gates, and Nan touched on the requirement for now boards to provide minutes in print. Actual paper copies to all the owners. And you sit there and you go, well, number one, just environmentally, it seems ridiculous. Number two, just logistically and from a cost standpoint, it seems ridiculous. But then you also look at some of the communications shortfalls like what you're describing, and you wonder if maybe it's a necessary evil.
Well, my concern more than anything, Ryan, besides unnecessary costs, which is ridiculous, is that we don't seem to be getting the respect or the consideration by the management companies and by the law that we are property owners here. And we seem to be treated very, in my opinion, neglectfully.
All right, Norm, I appreciate the call. Steve, what's your story?
Hello, yes, Mo. I wish I had my pillow right now. This is giving me a headache.
Okay, well, you know where to find it.
Yeah, you bet. Hey, that last gentleman had some really good points, and to all the people that have been speaking this morning, it's really good to bring this to the surface. There's just one thing I felt that you hadn't touched on totally. I'm a builder.
Okay.
As a builder, to become a builder, and when you start a project, you have to provide warranty. You have to get a warranty, and someone has to warranty you. So it seems like, and if there's a problem with the structure, the people that own it go to the warranty company, and they get money right now to pay for whatever is faulty in the construction or may come to pass. Then the warranty company goes after the builder. So it seems like there's a disconnect with the understanding of entitlement with the condo boards and the people in the condos. They should have somebody that's apprised legally a little bit to know that Joe Smith was a builder on this project. Let's go immediately to his warranty company.
So, Stephen, when you sign off on a project, like when you complete construction and hand over the keys, so to speak, what does that warranty look like? How protected are these new residents?
They will, the warranty companies, depending on the value of the project, you do not get warranty unless the warranty company has done its homework and has the ability to hold the builder's feet to the fire. There has to be enough money in backing through bond, through cash assets, or whatever the builder may possess to be able to satisfy a debt or an occurrence. So it seems to me like there's a little bit of misinformation here. And
well, what did you make of the assessment, Stephen, that developers had been getting away with murder? I mean, have you seen that in your industry, let's say in the last 10 years?
Here's where I need my pillow. Oh, it gives me a headache. Here's where I don't want to point fingers, but the city is the person that signs off on developments. Their last inspector, the last guy through the door, the girl that's through the door with the clipboard, looking for the final little piece to be completed and is satisfied. When they sign off and they say it's built and done correctly, then money, once that inspection, a final inspection done on the whole project is done, then the builder can, is satisfied he's done all he can. Funds transfer. The bottom line is you have to look to the city for some responsibility in the final word on the construction as well. If they miss something, maybe the condo board should be looking in that direction a little bit.
All right, Stephen, I appreciate the call. Thanks very much. Linda dialing in from Calgary. Linda, what's on your mind?
I bought a condo 25 years ago, and the guy who converted the apartment building 9-story was a complete crook and lied about all of the lifespan of your capital investment. So we got a good management company, and nickel and dimed our way through to the point we're probably one of the healthiest financial 42-unit buildings in Calgary and won Condo of the Year 2 years in a row.
Wow. But that probably was a bit, that probably to a certain degree in the journey felt like pulling teeth a little bit.
Oh, for sure. And I learned a lot about what's supposed to happen and what's not happening.
Yeah, well, good on you for being involved, Linda. I hate to cut you off. I'm out of time, but thank you for listening.
You're welcome.
Greatly appreciate it.
The Ryan Jespersen Show, weekday mornings at 9 on 630 CHED. 630 CHED. 630 CHED. 630 CHED. 630 CHED.